Hey guys, Phil Monteleone, the book peddler, coming to you with another YouTube video, and I got a real special one for you today. My friends Buzz and his wife Jackie have been stewards of history for many years, and they've assembled a fantastic collection of antiquities. The videos that I'm about to show you are Native American artifacts, specifically Iroquois, but there's much else to it as well, and early Americana. Buzz feels like it's his duty to share these things with the public, and I thank them both greatly for allowing me to videotape this. I know it's not books, but I assure you, you'll find it very special. Buzz is an archaeologist, very well versed in history, has a lot of stories and information to share, and even some of his own theories. There's also even a controversial story at the end dealing with New York State and some wampum beads. I will break this up into a three-part, most likely, episode and create its own playlist as it's worthy of it. And guys, feel free to leave comments and to thank Buzz and to spend the time with us so we can make these videos. I also show Buzz at the end a baby moccasin that I came across on one of my first antique picks, see what he thinks and if I struck gold, so you have to stick around for that as well. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's roll it. Hey guys, Phil Monteleone, the book peddler here, and I have a real treat for you today. I'm here with my friend Buzz Hesse, and Buzz has assembled one of the most amazing collections I've ever seen on Native American, Iroquois. There's a whole bunch of different stuff here that he's going to show us around, and he's been gracious enough to do so. So I hope you guys really enjoy it. So I just want to introduce you to Buzz, and Buzz, you say hello to my viewers out there and introduce yourself if you'd like.
All right, Bill, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And also the idea that you'd be interested enough to do it. The idea of the collection is to share it. And that's what I've always tried to do, is to impart what little knowledge I have and with others, so that we can all appreciate the prehistory and the history of the indigenous people, primarily from this area here. We can start right over here. As a matter of fact, the way the museum here is set up is chronological, going there from the most recent in time, back in time 14,000 years. That's principally the northeastern chronology. And this is the Iroquois false face collection. There are other things as we progress, which are Iroquois from the 1600s, the trade era. But these are the collections of masks. There are two types of masks. The wooden ones, they're participants in the Iroquois false face society. The ones that wore the wooden ones are called maskers, and the ones that wore the corn husk ones are called huskers. Of the collection that's here, these are protector masks when the major mask is put away, and these are used to protect the masks that are full size. One of the things about this wall right here, as far as this time period is concerned, and there are two masks here that I know who made them. One, this is called Elon Webster. If you look up Elon Webster, he is one of the principal maskers in the Iroquois culture, and one of the primary people in the Six Nations. By the way, the Six Nations includes the Tuscaroras. They were an adopted group into the Iroquois Confederacy and did not take part in decision making and policies and so on. But this one here has medicine bundle and a braided lock right here, which makes it really pretty unusual. I found this other one, which is also by Elon Webster, which is a mirror image, as you can see. The nose goes to the left, this one goes to the right. This is by far the better of the two. This mask up here is Jake Thomas, and this was owned by Roy Black, who was a Mohawk Iroquois man, and he owned the trading post down in the Mid-Hudson River region. And he was also, as I understood, a steel worker. But when he passed away, his wife allowed me to have this mask. So that has a nice attribution to it, not only because of the person who used it, but because of the person who made it. Both the makers of these masks are deceased. Of all the things that are here, the most scarce and rarest piece, and I've only ever seen one, is this stick right here. This is one piece of wood. It has a little mask on the top, and it's referred to as a tapping stick. Certain individuals who were in the False Face Society during certain ceremonies would go down on the floor, on all four, and crawl along the floor, tapping the stick, tapping the stick, tapping the stick as they went along. It is so scarce that there isn't one shown, not even in the definitive book, which I think is the definitive book of the Iroquois False Faces by William Fenton. This is a great book, and it tells lots about the culture, False Face Society, I should say. I've only ever seen two snapping turtle rattles of snapping turtle claws. This one right here was the first one I found, and then the second one was this one here. So I think they're pretty darn scarce. You do see the snapping turtle rattles, however. Not that they should be considered to be any less important, because they're all wonderful, but just to point out the fact that those two snapping turtle claws are pretty darn scarce. The other thing I would mention to you would be that this is the only corn husk mask that I have seen is hooded. As you can see, there's a hood on the back. So it covers up not only just the face, but the back of the head as well. And that's quite a wonderful mask, I think.
What does something like that date to, Buzz?
Well, I think that this is around 1900 maybe.
Okay.
Something like that.
Could I ask you a quick question?
Certainly.
These were used for ceremonial purposes? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. In the spring for sowing the crops and recognizing this change of the season, and harvesting, celebrating the harvest, and other specific events were celebrated or conducted by the False Face Society. One thing that would be of interest to you, of course, these are the typical rattles, the horn rattles. And these are quite typical. Not to say that they're common, because you don't see them much anymore. Mm-hmm. And then you have the knee rattles, which are just held in the hand and shaken like that. And these are dew claws of deer that make an added bit of noise. Cool. And this is a belt cup, which was used during certain ceremonies, and it was hung on the belt and used for drinking out of. Has a little rum keg in the back. I had one of these, which is probably the singular best one ever. And Mr. Eugene Thaw, who has the Thaw collection up in Cooperstown, he's passed away now, wanted it. And it consisted of a full-blown beaver carving on the top of it. Wow. And two beavers on the side that were inside, and fishes, and a rum keg and everything like that, made out of ash burl. It originally had come from Three Rivers up near Canada, and had been sold to DeVere Card, who has been passed away many years, a patriarch in the antiques business. And I knew about that, and when he passed away, I was able to acquire it, and I had it for many years, and it is now in the Thaw collection that can be seen up in Cooperstown at the Fenimore House. If you want to go take a look at it, it's worthwhile looking at.
That's awesome.
The last thing about this here are the mortars. And I've only ever seen two Iroquois mortars that were faceted. You can see the faceting here. Mm-hmm. I have bought every stump mortar that I've found. Only one I ever sold, which is to a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Dean Zerfes in Hartford, Connecticut. He wanted that particular piece, and he was such a good friend, and over the years I sold it to him. Awesome. Lastly, these two pieces right here, this tomahawk and this tomahawk, these are the real thing. These are the kind of things that, when they're on the warpath, so to speak, I hate to use that term because it's an overused term, but when they were out seeking to kill people, that's what it came down to. These are the kind of weapons that they use, not these kind. These are pipe tomahawks. And you can see for yourself, they're big, they're heavy. These were used as prestige things. They put them in their belt or had a handle on them, held them like this. They were just for the appearance. But these, and I'm going to give this to you to handle it. Look at that. Think of yourself running through the woods now with that. No encumbrance whatsoever. It's not heavy. It's lightweight. And that, believe me, will do the job.
Oh yeah, look at that spike.
And absolutely. So
wow.
This piece is a true tomahawk, a weapon of death, you might say. This came from the Chamberlain collection in Unadilla. When Howard Chamberlain was a dear friend of mine, now very elderly, it came up and sold me that collection. This was in it, and I was ecstatic because boy, that was just a super piece. Amazing. And then you can see this one here. All blacksmith made heads.
That's amazing.
Okay. This, by the way, is just a little bit of information about who has been helpful to me in acquiring and putting this collection together, particularly my very good friend John Nogent, who is a remarkable man, retired state trooper. Prior to that, he had been in the military, did I think 27 jumps from airplanes and so on. Really remarkable guy. He's terrific guy. One thing I forgot about the Iroquois is the double-ended pestle. This is a classic Iroquois pestle and used in wooden mortars. And over here is a pamphlet, Pennsylvania Archaeologist, that is in 1943, showing a Seneca Indian with a stump mortar and double-ended pestle, just for a reference. Now, curiously, 3 years ago, I was in South Korea, and I went to museums there that pertain to early objects that the Koreans used. Would you believe it? I saw double-ended pestles and mortars just like the Iroquois in South Korea.
No kidding. That's
remarkable. It's remarkable. Wow. So just to share that a little bit with you.
It's really cool.
Now we're going in time, back in time, and there's a connection here partially to do with the Sullivan-Clinton expedition. The Sullivan-Clinton expedition was in 1779. The purpose of that expedition was not to kill Indians, but to create a situation where the Indians wouldn't be able to survive because the expedition was burn the villages, burn the crops, and all that kind of stuff, and deprive the Iroquois of provisions that would sustain them. So it was a two-pronged event. General Clinton, came from Canajoharie, actually came up the Mohawk to Canajoharie with many bateaux, about 300 bateaux. I've seen different numbers in the historic records as to exactly how many bateaux there were. But were loaded with provisions and ordnance. And in the Cooperstown Library, there's one document up there that tells about ordnance that was on one of the bateaux, and it talks about different cannon, and it says there were 2 3-pounders. Well, this is one of the 2 3-pounders, if you can believe it. And it was found back here by a fellow digging bottles right out here in the river, and it was very low, the river was very low, and you look down and there laid the cannon down in the river bottom next to the shore. Now imagine, when Clinton came down here, he dammed up the mouth of Otsego Lake. There was about 2,000 soldiers with him. They spent some time there, they dammed the lake up because the river here is very shallow. So even with a flat bottom boat, it would have been impossible to get the boats on down to Tioga Point, which is on the other side of Binghamton, with all these provisions and ordnance and everything else. So they dammed the lake up, and then they broke it out. Now, the water is rushing down through, okay? Prior to that event, when Clinton first got there, he sent a small contingency downriver to see what it looked like. Lo and behold, there were snags in the river. In other words, trees had fallen over and so on. There would have been impediments regarding the boats that flow on down through. He had them removed, but he didn't go very far. There was no question that farther on down the river, there were going to be more snags. But when they raised the water level up, broke the dam out, the water level rised up and buried below the water level other snags. This is a theory that I have. Down here in the river, where it makes the bend, it goes very fast. Even now, it goes very fast there. Could you imagine the water level's up, it's kind of like semi-raging, if you will. This one bateau with this cannon on it hits an underwater snag, which they didn't see. It tips and the cannon comes off. And it lays there for 300 plus years, right? This is like 1778. You can do the math. And then this guy finds it there. And he had two other guys that weighs 267 pounds. And there it is, one of the only two 3-pounder cannons. A remarkable, remarkable thing. And he called me on the phone and said, "You buy cannons?" I said, "Sure." I didn't know what he had. He came over with it. Anyways, you can see I have now possession of it. And unfortunately, the young man has now passed away. But I'm grateful to him that he was able to think of me regarding it, because it connects with the next archaeological materials, which are these artifacts here and these artifacts here. In 1968, I found the Indian village of Unadilla. Now, to clarify that, the Indian village of Unadilla was on two sides of the river. It was on the north side, which is the southwestmost corner of Otsego County, and then the other side of it was on what is now Sydney, New York. But I found the site, first of all, on the north side, and excavated it under quite a bit of duress, only 4 days of digging, but I had a wonderful group of people who volunteered to help. It was all very organized. We did a map. Here's the map of the dig area. These are the features, the post molds, and so on. This is the physical location of where it was located. And in 4 days, we did the dig. We didn't get it all, because outside of our dig area, when they went in with the bulldozers to build a building there, we found even more, but we couldn't salvage anything. But we did find all of these artifacts in the features. They were not just at random. They weren't in the plow zone. They were buried in pits and fire hearths and things of that nature. So these were all truly archaeologically derived. At this point in time, these people were not fooling around, if you will, with bows and arrows. They had firearms, and they were modernized. And so they were using all this trade material, pottery and forks and knives and so on and so forth, gun flints. These are our tippet pipe fragments here. This is an iron axe. It's very small, you see, and it has a cartouche on it in a heart shape, and inside the heart-shaped cartouche is SB. I don't know who that is, but jokingly I said, that's Sarah Brant. Now, there was no Sarah Brant, but Joseph Brant is known to have stayed and worked out of this site. So Joseph Brant is a wonderful figure. I received some criticism years ago by writing an article about Joseph Brant, referring to him as a famous person. And I had people call me and say, "Oh, you have to be wrong about that. He was infamous." Well, you know what? It depends on what side of the fence you're on. Mm-hmm. The fact he was on the British side wasn't a factor for me. This guy was an incredible person. I would go on and on about that. I could spend all the time just talking about Joseph Brant. But he actually lived for a short period of time and stayed at this site. There were post molds there that we found were burned, because the site was burned, not by Clinton, by the way. The site was actually burned a year before by William Butler. William Butler came from the middle fort in the Schoharie area with about 300 plus people, and came down the year before. He went to Unadilla, then Gunny Gunter, which is the site below Unadilla, and then on down to Oyaquaga, where the biggest site was. And then the people in these villages, the Indian people in these villages and other inhabitants, fled ahead of the military forces coming in. They fled. And consequently, there was no people there, which is probably a good thing. And then on the way back, Butler burned on the way back. He didn't burn on the way down, he burned on the way back. And we found here on this site the charred remains of the posts and everything like that, ashes. This is how gray these
Yeah.
metal. That's because of ash that was in there. And look at this, we even found pins, straight pins. Talk about finding the needle in the haystack. We did very good digging there. There's a little effigy of a turtle, and I found this in hearth, little fish effigy. It would go on and on here, like that. There's one of the renderings of Joseph Brant, a picture of him up there. And here's a medallion, completely original medallion of Joseph Brant here, all silver. And then here's another rendering of Joseph Brant. And there are several different ones of Joseph Brant. These are not my favorites, by the way, but they're here. Lo and behold, though, this is most remarkable. There are 4 letters here. These are photocopies of the original letters, which I have put away. 3 of these letters are signed by Joseph Brant. And this one says Tunadilla, which is Unadilla. July 6, 1777. Signed by Joseph Brant.
That's amazing.
Soliciting an English Tory who lived up on the upper Unadilla for provisions. And then there's another one here by Brant, written to the Bostonians, articulating what I call an apology for the Cherry Valley Massacre. Okay? Because Brant states in this letter that he had no control over Walter Butler, not to be confused with William Butler. 2 different people, 2 different sides. Walter Butler was a pretty vicious guy. And he and Littlebeard, who was a Seneca, leading the Seneca people, on this massacre of Cherry Valley, were the ones who killed men, women, and children, unarmed, and so on. And by the way, that massacre was the straw that broke the back of our president at the time.
I can't remember.
Well, Washington.
Washington.
Yeah. And so what Washington did was he established the Sullivan-Clinton expedition. Sullivan was the main man. So anyway.
But so that was a reaction, the burning of these villages from the Cherry Valley and the Wyoming massacre as well.
That was before.
That was before. Okay.
Now, that's a good point to make. Let's go back to 1768. 1768 was the signing of the treaty at Fort Stanwix, New York. And that was paid for by the colonies to allow them to come forward for settlement, the colonial people, to come forward to the settlement this side of the Unadilla, which is only 12 or 13 miles down the road. So the Fort Stanwix treaty line was established then. And 11 years went by when the Brits, vis-a-vis the Iroquois, the Tories, and other people siding with the King George III, still continued to harass and burn the Wyoming massacre, the Cobbleskull massacre, Cherry Valley massacre. 11 years went by. That was the end of it. Well, Cherry Valley massacre was, like I said, the straw that broke the camel's back. So Washington said that's the end of that. So that's why this expedition was set up. It's pretty interesting to think about it, because what historians, I think, have missed in this particular aspect of history is that when that treaty line was established in 1768, it followed from Rome, New York, across to the headwaters of the Unadilla River, which was the 9-mile swamp, came down the Unadilla River to where the Indian village of Unadilla was located, where the confluence of that river with the Susquehanna was, and then it went overland to Cagouse. So Cagouse, which is now Deposit, was the Delaware area, and then the line followed the Delaware on down to Port Jervis, and then it veered off to the south and somewhat to the west. Everything on this side was legally available for the colonies to settle.
Okay.
See, and it was, catch this now, it was the original Wild West. That line was a demarcation line that separated the colonies from the West. Not in the 19th century when they had the big land rush in Oklahoma and all that, and everybody went out their wagons. No, it was right down the road here in the Fort Stanwix Treaty Line. That was the original Wild West on everything west of that line. And historians, like I said, I'm being repetitive, but they had forgotten about that or didn't recognize it. And they lumped it together. And by the way, The Sullivan-Clinton expedition, this is very important, was not part of the American Revolution. It took place at the same time as the American Revolution, but the purpose of it was entirely different. It had nothing to do with separating the colonies from Great Britain. Okay? So that's another thing that I think people should become aware of. And the only way it's going to be maybe popularized is if somebody writes a book about it. So, by the way, the Clinton campaign was the lesser of the two campaigns, but Clinton came down and met up with Sullivan at Tioga Point, which they combined their forces in and went out to Chemung into western New York to do the burn situation of the villages there. I might add one last little thing about the archaeology there at Unadilla. Remember I said that, perhaps I said, that native people who lived in these various villages were not present when the military forces came there. They had moved out ahead in advance, so they wouldn't be there. Well, I think archaeologically we can say that is absolutely true, because at the Unadilla site, it was obvious that they were running out of musket balls. Why do I think that? Because archaeologically we found where they were cutting up spoons and plates and different things like that, melting it down to make musket balls. Now, they weren't going to be destroying utilitarian objects unless they had to. So they were in the process of melting down. We found this puddle of lead, which had made a couple of musket balls anyway, and lots more sprues and little springlets like that down where they had been melting the lead, left there. And my interpretation of that is that they were in need of musket balls. They were melting things down like pewter to make musket balls out of. They weren't going to waste it, but they had to get their butts out of there. And in haste, they left this material, which otherwise would have been cast into musket balls, and fled. To me, that you have to read between the lines, but you don't want to read between the lines in an erroneous way. It has to be a logical, sensible way of interpreting. I see a lot of what's being published today I get it on my phone. So much archaeology is being touted as, I don't believe most of what I see. Anyway, so you have to be very careful. And I guess it just comes from my years of being an archaeologist with the state of New York and doing the very best logical, sound interpretation of what we found archaeologically, putting it together in the right way and interpreting the right way.
What's the reason for that? Why is the standard dropping? It sounds like the standard's dropping for a quick story, or why are they?
I think that most of the people who are reporting on these various stories don't know. They don't know. Yeah. They're ignorant. And another thing too is that they're probably also taking information from people who are making the discoveries who want to make a big headline.
Okay.
And so they pump it up and make claims that I really can't buy into.
Might be lacking like background of some sort.
Could be something like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's the story about the letters. One, by the way, is signed from Walter Butler. Again, not to be confused with William, because Walter was with the Crown, King George III. He, by the way, was killed on the Upper Oneida Creek, which is the northwestern edge of the Mohawk River, by an Oneida Indian. He was shot by an Oneida Indian, and this Indian ran across, I read it, and maybe it was stone or something, I don't remember now. He ran across the creek, and there he was slumped down, and he dispatched him and took his scalp and took his clothing, and other people took the clothing, because Walter Butler was not at all liked. And he was a vicious, I'm sorry, but the record shows he was a vicious guy. Anyway, so much for that. Now we're going back into early Iroquois historic times, 1600s. So a lot of this stuff dates from 1600 to 1650, Most of it does, actually. Silver ornaments that were made, again, probably mostly up in Canada and traded to the Indians. The Jesuit influence at this time, the Jesuits were here trying to Christianize the Indians. These down in this showcase here are Jesuit rings. And then they're doing all these different types of things, bone harpoons and coins, and making all these different kinds of objects. The Jesuits were, I would say, influential to a point. I think that, my guess is, I have to say it that way, that a lot of times the Iroquois confessed that they were going to be accepting Christianity because they were going to be given medallions and rings and bracelets and things like that. But in their heart, they probably weren't. Okay? I guess I can't address that in any comment beyond what I just said. It sounds sort of narrow-minded. Okay. But you can see this is all historic contact material and beads, glass beads, bells, copper kettles that were gotten. The English, the Dutch, and the French were the primary people who supplied the trade historic objects to the Native Americans in this part of the world here. There's a couple of little maskettes. They're drilled through and worn as necklaces. They're like false faces, but they're maskettes. These, generally speaking, across the line here, all the way down, these are Iroquois pottery. These up to here, except for this one, which is a Susquehannock pot, and it was very much influenced. They were influenced by the Iroquois. The Iroquois were also. I say this partially because this is what I think. The Iroquois were the first indigenous mafioso. Now you can take that as you want to, but historically it's been written. The Iroquois commanded from surrounding tribes tribute. Oh yeah, and in the Susquehanna region, down in this, not in the Susquehanna, excuse me, but in the Delaware River Valley, where the Susquehannocks lived, the lower Susquehanna as well, they went down there and raided their villages, and they took the women and the children, and the girls came back, the women came back, particularly in the Seneca territory, because the Seneca could easily access that part geographically in the south of this state in Pennsylvania. And you can see the similarities in pottery styles on Iroquois vessels there that were incorporated by Susquehannock women. But this is a pure Susquehannock Washington Borough pot. So a variety of pot. Pottery is very hard to come by. It's usually smashed up and broken and gone. They had, go ahead.
What did they have? I see holes here. What they have?
Pavillion suspension. It isn't common.
What year is this about?
They're all 17th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool.
And you can see there's combs here. There's two large beads over in there. They're called beryl chevrons. Mm-hmm. These are really wonderful objects that the Iroquois had. This is an effigy pipe, stone pipe of a woman, rather graphic if you look at it closely.
We'll blur that out.
And I know where there's a Mohawk pipe. It was found by a young boy, just a little lad. His parents went to a site called Stone Arabia up in the Mohawk Valley, which is the same time period, more or less, of what we're talking about, of Mohawk. And in the leaves, he found this wonderful red stone pipe of two human effigies, a head here and a head here, and the bodies were raised on the front and the back, showing the genitalia. It was probably a puberty pipe or something like that. Somebody had dug that pipe out and didn't see it. And it got lost in the leaves, and this young boy found it. But he's passed away now. He's grown up, he married, and had kids, and he's now passed away. I've wanted to have that pipe for decades. But it's okay. I saw it, I've handled it, and I'm happy that I had that opportunity. But that kind of thing, if you will, sexual related things, is not an uncommon thing in indigenous cultures. You know, in our Victorianization of our own thinking today, which is far, far, far less than what it used to be during the last century. It's a common thing, and it's all part of human beings. These are Jesuit crosses. They were found on a Cayuga site and in a bundle like this. They must have been in a pouch, and the pouch rotted away and just left all of them together like that. See? The Indians, the Iroquois, I should say, were prone to make these little effigies, like that red back frame right there, out of lead. And they were little tokens, so they had little bags, and sometimes they're drilled and so on. I'm thinking there's one here that's really quite remarkable. This one here in the red is a bird, and it's drilled through the neck so it could be hung on a necklace. It's a wonderful lead effigy. The wooden ware and so on. Let me think about this for a second. These are flintlock musket barrels, and that's part of a spoon and a part of a flintlock lock, trigger guard there. And then you see a variety of things here. Also these mouth harps, sometimes called Jews' harps. They're commonly found on Iroquois sites of this time period. These are also called kettle points sometimes. They're brass points, and I've actually seen scissors, excavated scissors, where the Iroquois would take the scissors and cut the copper kettles or brass kettles and cut and make these projectile points.
That's awesome.
See? So that's interesting. Let's see, it's going down this way. Just a variety of different things. These are deer phalanges that have been drilled here and carved out on the bottom. Are used for jangles of decoration on clothing. These here, there's another Jesuit ring there. Just a whole variety of different historic things. Now we come up here to this case here, which is I'm rather fortunate really in having these pipes, because the Iroquois made some remarkable pipes. And these are some of them. Face pipes, a Mother Nation, Whistler pipe, a snake pipe over there, there's a bear pipe there, or maybe it's a fox of some sort, hard to really know exactly. This is one of my favorite things, although totally unpretentious, right in that case there with the black background. It's a thimble, like a sewing thimble. Well, we found some of these thimbles at the Egley site. By the way, I didn't tell you that the Unadilla site of Unadilla, is also known as the Egley site. They're pierced through the top. And I've always said these are jangles, ornaments. This one has in it the original attachment, cordage attachment. It's knotted in the bottom, it's pushed up through, and the copper salts from the copper, or brass if you will, they have this chemical process, preserved the cordage. And there I was proving what I'd said all along, that they were jangles. Okay. But you can see these two ones there. And teeth, they love calamite, and so on. Now, prior to the historic time period for Iroquois, proto-historic, which are probably around the 1300s, the very beginning of the 1400s, more or less 1400s, the projectile point, they didn't have any metal. So this is prehistoric Iroquois. And they made these points here, which are triangular points, small, narrow, and they're called Madison points. That's the typological name. There is a point that goes in between these and the earlier culture, which is the Wasco, which are these, which are called Lavana points. These are Wasco. Wasco is the culture, and the cultural name comes from Wasco Lake, out in the Finger Lake. But the Wasco people lived all around. In fact, in this area right here, I called it almost an epicenter for the Wasco culture, because there's many, many Wasco sites here in this area, many of which I found that were unfound, undug. I dug on one of them for 3 years. But between these two types, there was another type, which I guess I have some somewhere, but they're longer and narrower, called chance phase. That's a phase between prehistoric Iroquois and the Owasco culture. The Owasco culture was here about 1100 AD, 950 AD, something like that. But these are Owasco, not Iroquois, but pre-Iroquois. And they evolved culturally into the Iroquois people, okay? So there was this cultural evolution. But the Iroquois people, in my opinion, cannot be found going back historically and specifically prehistorically any farther than the Owasco culture, which is about, let's round it up, 1,000 years BC. 1,000 years ago, I should say. So the Owasco culture is a great culture. They made a lot of stuff. They made these broad isosceles. And this is a very atypical one there. It departs from the norm. I found this on one of the sites that was never done. It has an angle here, it comes up, and then a little nipple in the center, it comes down and over that way. I never saw another one. It has to be unique, like that point. Now, as soon as you say something is unique, somebody out in the great hinterland will say, oh, wait a minute, I've got one just like that. Well, they're pretty darn rare, let's put it that way. I never saw another. Okay. They made these perforators, which were used for drilling. These are thumbnail scrapers. They're plain old convex. They curved on the top and flat on the bottom, made them flakes, chip back that and use them for scrapers.
Cool.
Okay. So that's the Owasco material. In here, we're going back again to Iroquois. There's a little shell duck over there. It's drilled through the neck. They're used as ornaments. Why they're called shell ducks, I don't know, but that's what the nomenclature is. It's an ornament made out of shell. These are broken effigies from Iroquois pipes, but they're so cool that they're worthy. This one right here, let's see if I'm right about that. No, this one right here, with a long nose on it, is hollow. The head is hollow. The eyes, and underneath by the sides of the mouth, and there's a hole in the back. What happened here was the effigy would be on the end of the smoking pipe. You take in a puff of smoke, bring it back to your mouth, and blow the smoke into the back of the head, and the smoke would then come out the eyes and by the mouth. Imagine the effect that would have in a dark longhouse with only fire from the fireplace, from the wood burning. It would be very, very, I think, impactful. There's a whole different bunch of things in here. I could go on and on with that. These pots here are just the way they came to me. I didn't do any of them. These are Owasco pots. These are the pots that these people made. The Owasco people made these Lavender points. Okay. Now it goes back into pre-Owasco, which is, by the way, I should tell you, there are several different what I call archaeological stages that define projectile points and cultures. Going from the earliest one, which is over here, we'll get to that, is called the Paleo-Indian stage. That's around 14,000 years ago. That is the end of the Pleistocene and the end of the megafauna, such as mammoths and mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, what do you call those things? Beavers the size of Volkswagens. I mean, you're huge animals. They all became extinct back in that's the Paleo-Indian stage. The earliest, of course, are the Clovis points and the Folsom point. But we'll get to that over there. That's that stage. Then it goes into the Archaic stage, which is 3 parts, early, middle, and late Archaic. That is the bulk of the prehistoric material that we find. We go out in the field, the projectile points that we find. Now that's another point I'd like to make. Projectile points. They're not arrowheads. The Lavana points and the Madison points and the copper points are arrowheads. Okay. But prior to the Owasco, there wasn't arrowheads here in the Northeast in this region. They're not arrowheads. Even the little ones like this are not arrowheads, like Lamoka. They're not. All these things should be called projectile points. That covers the whole gamut. Both arrowheads and spear points, javelin tips, dart points like that. And over here, we'll get to this, is called the area where we have the apparatus. And that predates bows and arrows. So most people call all this stuff arrowheads, they're wrong. It's not wrong. So, but these are, now this is prehistoric material here too. These are fish hooks. These come from the famous site up at Jack's Reef. And I think that you'll, if you knew anything about prehistoric fish hooks, I'm fortunate to have these. I had a lot more, which I sold years ago, but I kept these. These are some of the finer, perhaps the finest rendering of bone fish hooks that anyone might ever find. They made some wonderful stuff there on Jack's Reef up in the Seneca River. And there's two of the fish hooks there. Bone material is hardly ever found down on the river flats. Most of the valley floors are acidic. So perishable materials like wood and bone are gone. The solid things like stone is left. But in certain circumstances, you can find perishable materials. And that's what happened here. These came out of rock shelters. And these are Jack's Reef points, which are just before the Lavana points. And then you get into the pentagonals. They're, again, before the Lavanas and Wasco. These are Fox Creek. An interesting story about the Fox Creek culture. Dr. Ritchie published a book, he's passed away now, but Typology and Nomenclature of New York State Projectile Points. And in that book, he depicted all the different types of projectile points were known in the Northeast, particularly here in New York State. But he didn't have any archaeology to back up the age of these points up here. He called them Steubenville stemmed and Steubenville lanceolate, which is from the archaic panhandle in West Virginia. The points were found first up there and defined, but no archaeological evidence. They were just at random. I found the very first site ever discovered pertaining to this culture right up the road here on Mill Creek. I didn't dig it until the second year. I was working for the state at the time, and Dr. Funk, who had become the state archaeologist, was digging on the Westheimer farm up in the Schoharie Valley on a stratified site, and one of the lower level of occupation, he found the same projectile points in a stratum which was the same cultural entity. Well, I dug our site first, and then, I found our site first, and then we dug the sites 2 years later simultaneously, him down in the Schoharie and me up here. When he named the culture, Dr. Funk was a dear, dear friend of mine, but he was also my boss, okay? And he wanted to name it Fox Creek after the creek that came down where the site was. And I said, well, why don't we name it Mill Creek, because that's where the first site was found. And he had a friendly argument about it, and I gave it, and he called the culture Fox Creek. But now, Dr. Ritchie, by the way, in the book Typology and Nomenclature, puts this culture into the early Archaic, which is 6,000 to 7,000, something like that, BC. Do you know what the carbon dates were on both of the sites? His and mine? 360 AD. 360 AD. Not even close. So that really made a significant difference in the cultural sequence, chronologically, of projectile points in the state of New York. Little side story. Then you go back into even earlier times. These are Orient fish tails, 1200, 1300, BC. You're talking, 2000, 2500, 600. The same thing. These are Susquehanna broads. Different points. These are Perkiomen, and they're all date. No, I didn't continue with the stages. I talked to you about the Paleo-Indian stage. Then I talked to you about the Archaic stage. Okay, early, middle, and late. Well, these are in the end of the Archaic stage in a period of time called transitional. Why is it called transitional? It's a period of time when pottery wasn't being used, but at the end of that time period, pottery began to be used. This is the kind of vessel that was used during the transition. Steatite. It was soapstone, also called amphibolic talc. And these things can get big, like this. There's a quarry over near Canaan on the other side of the Mohawk Valley. The Hudson River Valley, where you can still go and see bowls that were in the process of being extracted from the matrix, but they never completed taking them out. But these are the pottery bowls.
Jackie Hesse.